You begin in a room made of dark, creaking wood. Lantern light flickers on polished beams. Somewhere outside, a reed flute plays a meandering, slightly off-key tune. It's not unpleasant. It's just drowsy. Like the man playing, it has already fallen asleep but forgot to stop blowing. You're in a pleasure quarter, not a flashy one. No dancers are leaping through rings of fire. Just quiet footsteps on worn cobbles and women in silk robes moving like ghosts through paper doors. You're in Tang dynasty China. More precisely, Chang'an, the capital. It's the 8th century. The city is massive, one of the biggest and busiest in the world. But tonight, it feels like the whole place has nodded off. There's a woman across from you. She's sipping tea very, very slowly. She hasn't said a word yet. You wonder if she's thinking something profound. She's probably just waiting to see if you'll fall asleep sitting up. It happens. A man walks in. He's not a client. He's a scribe. He's not just any scribe, but a scribe of the pleasure quarter, responsible for documenting the contractual arrangements between the courtesans and their clients. He opens a scroll, clears his throat, dips a brush into ink, and begins to read. This is a contract, a real, legal, multi-clause, bureaucratically binding contract for a night or month or sometimes a year with one of the many women known as e.g. elite courtesans trained in music, poetry, and the fine art of gently insulting their guests. Here's your warning. You probably won't make it through this day, but that's okay. You're not here to hustle. You're here to float. Before we begin, please consider liking and subscribing. Keeps the lanterns glowing and the tea warm. Please let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. We're curious, also nosy. Now let's relax on tonight's ride into the quiet, layered world of ancient contracts and intimate negotiations. The scribe keeps writing. His brush swirls in gentle curves. The contract is not about love. It's not even really about sex. It's mostly about logistics. How many nights? What food is provided? Will there be music? Whose responsibility is it to offer fresh reeds to the flute? It's strangely detailed and very polite. These were formal documents between adults who knew the value of ink. Here's your first historical fact. By the Tang dynasty, prostitution was not just tolerated. It was licensed, taxed, and widely considered a necessary institution in a city where everyone needed a break from poetry. This unique cultural practice is just one of the many intriguing aspects of this historical period. A strange cultural fact? Some contracts included fees if the client attempted to perform poetry themselves. That's right. If your verse was bad, you got fined romantic tragedy in 5 lines or fewer. Now, the woman across from you, let's call her Mylan, is still quiet. She was trained at a government-recognized school for courtesans. Yes, that was a thing. In some cases, it was run by retired courtesans. The curriculum included lute, ink painting, and politely rejecting bad marriage proposals. There's a small dish of candied lotus root between you. You don't remember ordering it, but it tastes like sleep and old libraries. Mylan smiles just barely. She's not here to flirt. She's here to make you feel like the world has softened, and maybe convince you to pay for a second night, which would require a new scroll, more tea, and possibly a performance by her cat, if it's in the mood. You can hear footsteps upstairs, low voices, a laugh that tries to echo but gives up halfway. The scribe adds a final clause. The guest may not request any song more than 3 times in one evening. Smart. Nobody wants to hear the same sad tune on a loop. Scholars still debate whether these contracts were truly enforceable or just symbolic agreements meant to save face. But many of them were stored, sealed, and even notarized. Paperwork is eternal. A tiny bell rings outside. Maybe a curfew, or perhaps the cook dropped a spoon again. Mylan finally speaks. She asks if you'd like to hear a story. You nod, because of course you do. That's why you're here. She leans forward. Her voice is low and a little raspy, like it's been whispering through time to get to you. She tells you about a client from years ago, a man who tried to include exclusive rights to foot massages in a long-term contract. He also requested his room key and a custom poem for every meal. She didn't sign it, but she did keep the scroll. It was too funny not to. There's a quiet reverence in this world, not just for pleasure, but for boundaries, for rhythm, for tea served at the right temperature, for a flute played just slightly wrong so you know it's live. It's a world where every detail, from the quality of the tea to the skill of the musician, is appreciated and respected. Another fact emerges. Many courtesans lived independently, owned property, and managed their finances. They weren't wives, but they weren't powerless. They existed in a space that didn't quite translate, a little like jazz musicians with real estate portfolios. Their independence and power in a society that often restricts women's rights is truly inspiring. The candle gutters, a shadow flickers, someone coughs behind the wall, and a hand waves it off. You're starting to understand why they needed contracts. With this many layers of silk and civility, misunderstandings were inevitable. Another weird detail. Some contracts included rain day clauses. If the storm was too severe and the client couldn't arrive, the time was not counted, but also not refunded. These clauses were a practical consideration in a society where the weather could significantly impact daily life. The fine print was serious business. The scribe rolls up the scroll and ties it with a red string. Mylan bows her head slightly, a gesture that somehow means nice doing business, and please don't recite your poem now. You feel warm, not in love, not even romantic, just gently folded into something timeless. Remember that flute? It's playing again, worse than before, but now it sounds nice. Outside, the streets of Qing whisper with wind and merchant calls. But here inside this wooden room you feel safe, sleepy, and oddly respected by paperwork. You look down. Somehow, without noticing, you've signed your name on the scroll. No turning back now. The room has softened around you, like the day's edges have been gently rubbed out. You feel the warm weight of history pressing on your shoulders, inviting you to relax, to be here in this moment. Mylan's smile lingers, just barely visible at the corners of her mouth. She watches you as if she knows exactly where your thoughts are wandering. But she doesn't rush. In this world, time is not something to be spent. It's something to be savored. Now, let's slip deeper into the ancient customs of these pleasure quarters. The contracts, the rituals, they're not just about sex or indulgence. No, they're about the art of negotiation, the subtle dance of human interaction. What you're witnessing is a grand social experiment. It's almost like a business meeting, but much, much quieter. You glance down at the scroll, now rolled up beside you. The ink on it is faded, a little smudged where the scribe's brush didn't quite land. The words are there, clear, tidy. But something about them feels different. They don't just say what the woman will do. They say what she won't do. It's a fine line, a negotiation of desires, of limits, a contract in the truest sense. Both parties agree, but neither is really at the mercy of the other. Here's your central historical fact. In the Tang dynasty, the system of licensing and taxation of courtesans meant that, by law, their transactions were as formal as any trade agreement. In fact, many, e.g., the higher-class courtesans, were as well regarded as the aristocrats they entertained. The idea was not simply to make money but to preserve honor and avoid scandal. So yes, they had contracts, written contracts. The state backed these. Sometimes they even included promises of good health. That's right, no one wants to do business with a tired courtesan. A curious fact, not all courtesans followed the strict rules. Some were more rogue, choosing instead to perform for political leaders. They would use their talents, such as poetry and musical ability, to subtly support one faction over another. It was a quieter form of influence. No swords, just words and melodies. Think of it like ancient political spin but with more liars. Mylan shifts, and the light seems to change. It's as if the lanterns have dimmed just a little more, or perhaps your eyelids are getting heavy. The teacup is now empty. You don't remember drinking it, but the porcelain is cool to the touch. The air smells like old wood and something faintly floral, a scent that lingers in the corners of your mind. You decide to ask a question, although you're not sure why. How did a woman get into the business of courtesanship? Her eyes soften. It's almost like you've asked her to recount a cherished memory. She pauses, considering. Well, she says slowly, sometimes a woman would start in a lower-tier establishment. These weren't the fancy, lacquered rooms you see now. No, they were more like small tea houses with a few extra cushions. If you had talent or beauty or sometimes just a good connection, you'd rise through the ranks. If you could hold a poem in your heart and a lute in your hands, you had a real chance. But, she adds with a sly grin, it wasn't always about what you could do. It was about what you could negotiate. Everything had a price. And there it is. You've just stumbled into the heart of the matter. This wasn't simply a transaction of pleasure. It was a complex system of relationships, each defined by its own rules, its currency. Her voice grows softer, and you feel the weight of centuries pressing against you. A small sigh escapes your lips, and it's a sigh that carries with it all the tension of the modern world, a reminder of how different things have become. Another small historical tidbit. Contrary to what many people might assume, the role of E.G. was not to entertain men. They were often tasked with educating the elite, acting as the cultural bridge between the intellectual and the political. In a way, they were diplomats of leisure, moving between people of power and influence. Much like today's public figures who shape discourse with a smile and a handshake, they did so with a delicate flick of the wrist. Her fingers tap lightly on the edge of the teacup. It's a rhythm, not rushed, not too slow, just enough to make you realize how quietly the world turns. Now, let's talk about the contracts themselves. These weren't just scraps of parchment hastily signed in dimly lit rooms. Oh no, these were professionally drafted documents, written with the precision of a bureaucrat, and likely reviewed by someone with too much time on their hands. Legal terms, descriptions of service, exact hours, everything was laid out. It was business, yes, but also art. You almost wonder if the act of writing the contract was as much of a performance as anything that happened afterward. The contract also included a section on conduct. You see, just like any respectable profession, there were expectations. For instance, no more than 3 glasses of wine before a performance. No slurred poetry. A guest's behavior was just as crucial as the courtesan's performance. And if you thought about stepping out of line, well, the penalty clauses were there. Fines for unacceptable behavior, but also fines for failing to deliver on promises. It wasn't just about money. It was about reputation, trust, honor. Remember that political intrigue from earlier? Some of the contracts included provisions for political meetings. Now, we're not talking about smoke-filled rooms or backroom deals. We're talking about intellectual discourse, poetry recitals for ministers, lute concerts in the emperor's chambers. In the Tang dynasty, this was high art and even higher stakes. The courtesan's words could change the course of an empire, one well-placed verse at a time. Mylan stops talking for a moment. Her gaze drifts toward the window. The city outside is quiet, save for the occasional clang of a distant gong or the shuffle of feet in the streets. And then you realize it's your turn to ask. Your turn to pick up the thread of this ancient, quiet conversation. But before you speak, you take a moment to listen. Listen. The sound of her voice has become part of the room, part of the air. With the flickering of a lantern, everything feels almost too gentle, too slow, too peaceful. But that's the point. The past isn't some great battle. It's a quiet negotiation, a whispered contract between then and now. You feel sleep tugging at the edges of your mind. The teacup is empty. The scroll is packed away. The room is growing darker. And though the city outside rumbles, inside this small chamber, all you can hear is the quiet tap of fingers on wood. The room seems to grow quieter with each passing moment, as if time itself has slowed. The flickering lantern casts long shadows, stretching out like old memories you can't quite place. The air feels thick with history, heavy yet comforting, like a well-worn blanket. Mylan remains still, her eyes half closed. The only sound now is the occasional rustle of silk against wood. The faint scent of tea lingers, mixing with the musty wood of the room. Somewhere outside, the night has fallen entirely, but in here, it feels like a place frozen in time, a moment you could never quite leave. You watch her, not quite sure if she's waiting for you to ask more questions, or if she's lost in her thoughts. After a long while, you realize she doesn't need to speak anymore. She's given you everything. The stories, the contracts, and the glimpse into a world that's long gone but still echoing in the walls. And yet, there's still something you haven't quite understood. You know, you murmur, "What happened to these contracts?" She blinks, a slight smirk playing at the corner of her lips. She replies, as if she's been expecting this question all along. They faded, of course. The practice didn't last forever. Laws changed. Society changed. The Tang dynasty ended. New dynasties rose with different priorities. However, those contracts were a product of their time. And in many ways, they represented a complex, evolving social contract between the government, the people, and, of course, the courtesans. You find yourself contemplating her words. The contracts, so formal, so precise, weren't just about transactions. They were symbolic of a moment when society attempted to balance desire with decorum and pleasure with regulation. There's a historical tidbit here that's almost hard to believe. The concept of EG didn't vanish overnight. Even after the Tang dynasty faded, certain remnants of the practice continued into later periods. In the Song dynasty, for instance, many of the courtesans who once served the elite found new roles in entertainment, poetry, and even academia. These women, no longer bound by formal contracts, still carried the prestige of their former titles, a beautiful echo of a bygone era. But what happened to those early contracts, the ones written in ink so carefully, so deliberately? Historians still debate whether any of them survived intact or if they were eventually lost to the inevitable passage of time. We have fragments and references in ancient texts, but never a complete picture. It's a little like trying to read a letter where the ink has bled away. So much of it is lost, shrouded in the mystery of time. Mylan stands up, stretching her arms with the elegance of someone who has perfected the art of moving slowly. She offers you another smile, her gaze soft yet piercing. "Shall I tell you about the end of an era?" she asks. Her voice is quiet as the still night outside, her every movement a testament to grace and poise. You nod because why not? What else could there be to discover? "Well, the end came with the fall of the Tang dynasty," she says, her tone almost wistful. As the empire weakened, many of the old traditions started to fade. Prostitution, though still legal, began to be viewed with less reverence. The courtesans became less like artists and more like, well, business transactions. Gone were the contracts and the carefully crafted legal terms. In their place were other forms of entertainment, more accessible and less formal. It was the beginning of the end for the EG. She moves to the window now, pulling aside the paper-thin curtain. The night outside is almost otherworldly in its stillness. You follow her gaze. The streets of Chang'an are quiet, the clamor of the day long gone, leaving only the gentle hum of the city's heartbeat. The end of the Tang dynasty marked a slow, inevitable decline for the courtesans and their contracts. You wonder if it was the same for the rest of society, an entire world fading into a memory, replaced by something simpler, more utilitarian. It's a reminder that even the grandest systems, no matter how intricate, can fall apart under the weight of change. You think about the contracts again. Their neat rows of characters, the clauses and subclauses that determine so much. Yet in the end, it was all paper. And like all things written on paper, it would eventually crumble. It's strange how everything in this world seems to slip away, even the things that seem most solid. Like those contracts now lost to time. Or even the tea that's cooled and left behind. Nothing lasts forever. Not even the well-regulated, perfectly planned world of Tang courtesans. A small chuckle escapes you, though it's more out of habit than actual humor. Mylan tilts her head, her smile remaining just slightly out of reach. "What's so funny?" she asks. You shrug, not quite knowing how to answer. "I suppose I find it strange that something so formal could simply vanish like that." "Ah," she says, turning back toward you with a knowing glance. "It wasn't about the formality. It was about the moment. The contract wasn't the important thing. It was the connection, the words, the music. You let her words settle into the silence of the room, feeling them wrap around you like the softest blanket. There's something deeply comforting about the idea that, in the end, it wasn't the contracts that mattered. It was the moments they captured, the fleeting beauty of human connection, wrapped up in delicate words and soft promises. The room feels warmer now, almost as if the weight of history has eased off your shoulders. The city outside remains distant, but inside, it's as if time itself has slowed down just for you, allowing you to rest for a little longer. You let yourself drift into the gentle pull of the night, knowing that tomorrow, the world will still be here. But for now, you are perfectly content to stay just where you are, surrounded by the warmth of stories and the soft rhythm of the past. The room feels even quieter now, almost as though the world has started to fall asleep along with you. Mylan stands by the window, her back turned to you, a silhouette against the soft glow of the lanterns. The flicker of the flame dances in her hair, casting gentle shadows across the walls, and for a moment, it's almost as if she's part of the night itself. Timeless, serene, watching the city breathe. You, on the other hand, are still trying to catch up. The contracts, the courtesans, the strange, almost delicate balance between art and business. You feel like you're floating through a dream. A quiet dream where history doesn't rush past, but rather, it hums softly, like an old lullaby, slowly rocking you into a state of peace. Mylan turns around, her expression calm, almost knowing. You know, she says softly, these contracts were never just about money. They were about value, human value. A courtesan wasn't just an entertainer. She was a symbol of the delicate relationship between desire and honor. You blink, processing the weight of her words. A symbol of desire and honor. You can almost hear the ancient rhythms of life in her tone, a heartbeat that still echoes, even today. It strikes you then. These contracts were, in many ways, a safeguard against the chaos of human emotion. A way to keep things in order, to preserve both the dignity of the courtesan and the client. In a world that often teetered on the edge of chaos, these contracts were, oddly enough, a symbol of control, of civility. However, the contracts weren't the only aspect of the courtesans' lives that was regulated. No, the courtesans themselves, e.g., were often held to very high standards of behavior. You might have expected wild, untamed women who lived on the fringes of society, but what you'd find instead were highly trained individuals with strict codes of conduct. They were, in fact, more like performing artists than anything else. Poets, musicians, dancers, and at times even political commentators. One of the more obscure facts you uncover is that courtesans in the Tang dynasty often had patrons who were responsible for sponsoring their education, clothing, and well-being. These patrons weren't just wealthy merchants or officials. They were intellectuals, poets, and artists who saw the courtesans as muses, not just lovers. In many ways, the courtesans were regarded as integral to the cultural fabric of society, and they were treated accordingly. The relationship between a courtesan and her patron was not just a financial transaction, but a complex interplay of art, culture, and personal connection. But there were also darker aspects to this world, weren't there? You've heard the whispers, the stories of courtesans who didn't sign contracts, of those who were forced into the life, not as respected professionals but as victims of circumstance, poverty, or family pressure. You wonder if they, too, had their forms of contracts, ones written in invisible ink, ones that could never be read, even if you tried. Mylan's voice breaks your reverie. It wasn't all gentle, she says, her tone now tinged with a hint of sadness. You see, not all contracts were fair. Not all of them were honored. Some men tried to change the terms. Men who thought they could break a contract just because they were wealthy or powerful. You nod slowly. There it is, the harsh reality behind the soft rhythm of the past. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. The courtesans were not immune to the abuses of power that colored every aspect of human history. Even the most carefully crafted contract couldn't prevent the dangers of the world outside the room. In the end, they were still at the mercy of a society that didn't always understand the value of respect or equality. A historical fact lingers here. In the Tang dynasty, courtesans enjoyed more freedom than women in many other parts of the world. They could own property, inherit wealth, and even choose their lovers. Yet, despite these freedoms, they were still bound by societal expectations, many of which were tied to the very contracts they signed. The law didn't see them as equals. It saw them as symbols of something else entirely. These societal expectations often placed a heavy burden on the courtesans, shaping their lives and relationships in ways that were not always apparent to the casual observer. But that's the thing with symbols. They can be beautiful and valuable, but they can also trap us in an idea that doesn't quite fit reality. Mylan might have been a symbol of beauty, grace, and culture, but she was also a woman who lived in a world that demanded certain things of her, just as it demanded certain things of the men who came through these doors. As you sit there, reflecting on her words, you start to wonder about the men in these contracts, the patrons, the ones who signed their names beside the courtesans. You imagine them sitting in rooms much like this one, ink-stained fingers hovering over parchment. What did they think in the quiet moments before they signed their names? Did they view these women as equals, as colleagues, or as mere commodities to be traded for their pleasure? The idea of power is complex, and in this world, it wasn't as simple as who had the ink and the seal. It was about understanding, about recognizing the shared humanity between a man and a woman, between a patron and a courtesan, between two people who were more than their roles in society. A small chuckle escapes you, though it's not mocking. You can't help but marvel at the strange, intricate dance of life and power. You think back to that first contract, the one you saw so perfectly balanced in its bureaucracy. It was almost too perfect, too neat. It makes you wonder, was it ever truly about the money? Or was it about control? About creating an illusion of order in a world that was far from orderly? Tell me, you ask, your voice barely a whisper. What happened to the courtesans after the Tang dynasty fell? Mylan pauses. Her eyes darken, but only slightly. Many of them adapted, she says softly. Others were forgotten. Some went into obscurity, while others found new ways to be heard. And there, in the softness of her voice, you understand. They weren't forgotten, not really. Even now, you can feel their presence. Their stories, half-formed, tucked away in scrolls and contracts, still live, waiting for someone to remember them. Outside the window, the world has quieted. The streets of Chang'an are no longer bustling with activity, and the distant hum of the city feels far away, like an echo from another time. Inside this room, though, time feels as if it stood still. You lean back, the softness of the moment wrapping around you. Mylan has retreated to the shadows now, her presence almost a part of the room itself. And you realize, without even trying, you've found a quiet peace in this long-forgotten world. One that doesn't ask for answers, only calm, steady reflection. The night deepens, wrapping its arms around the room. The soft glow of the lanterns now feels like the only light in the world. Outside, the moon is just beginning to rise, but you can't see it through the paper walls, only the way the shadows stretch longer, stretching back into time. The world outside might be changing, but here, the pace is slow and deliberate, like the delicate brushstrokes of an ancient painting. Mylan is gone for now, but her presence lingers. You almost expect to hear the faintest hum of a lute or the rustle of silk. The city is far away now, and you are alone in this quiet space with your thoughts. You could almost drift off into sleep, and perhaps just before you do, you'll catch a glimpse of those carefully drawn contracts again. Those contracts that somehow connected the past to the present, the ordinary to the extraordinary, bridging the gap between the Tang dynasty and our modern world. A thought crosses your mind. How many people in the Tang dynasty, from the emperor to the beggar on the street, understood the full significance of these courtesans and their contracts? How many saw them as just women, just another part of the market? Or how many, like the poets and musicians, truly recognized their role in the cultural fabric of society? And then there's the question that lingers, always at the back of your mind. Why do these stories matter? Why do we still talk about contracts from centuries ago? Why does this quiet world of poetry, music, and ink feels so alive today. You turn the question over almost absently. Perhaps it's because, at some level, we are all trying to understand how to balance control with freedom. How to navigate a world of complex desires, conflicting duties, and delicate human interactions. The courtesans of the Tang dynasty, with their contracts and their delicate negotiation of pleasure and power, seem like a mirror to the world we live in today, where every relationship, every exchange, seems to carry its unspoken contract. This delicate balance is a testament to the complexity of life and relationships. And that's where the beauty lies, in the complexity of it all. In the way these contracts, these ancient pieces of paper, are still somehow relevant today. They remind us that life is not always about simple answers. It's about the dance, the negotiation, about finding balance in a world that often feels like it's spinning out of control. You lean back, sinking further into the cushions, the soft hum of the room filling your senses. You could almost believe this is your world now, this quiet, slow-paced space. Here, time moves differently. It's not fast and busy, like the streets outside. No, here, everything unfolds in its own time, gentle and calm. Another fact lingers in your mind, one you had almost forgotten. The EG were not just entertainers. They were also educators. At their peak, many of them were highly sought after for their intelligence. They were not just beautiful faces, but minds capable of debating philosophy, discussing history, and offering their insights on matters of culture and politics. It was a world where beauty and intellect were not separate but intertwined. And yet, despite their esteemed positions, the EG were always walking a fine line. Society was always watching, judging. They had to maintain the illusion of respectability, even as they performed in the shadows of the elite. Now, you realize that Mylan has returned. She sits across from you again, her presence soft, almost invisible. Her eyes meet yours, and for a moment you wonder what she sees. What does she think of this strange visitor from the future, who has wandered into her world of silk, paper, and ink? What does she make of the questions that linger in the air? You clear your throat, and the silence in the room is almost too comfortable. Do you think anyone truly understood what these contracts meant? You ask quietly, not sure if she'll answer. Her eyes glimmer slightly in the lantern light, and she smiles again, just a little. I think they understood, she says, her voice low, but maybe not in the way you think. They understood that everything has a price. Not just money, but reputation, power, and respect. Even love in its way. These contracts weren't just about what was written on paper. They were about understanding what was left unsaid. Her words settle like dust in the air, a slow, thoughtful response that wraps itself around you, making you pause, making you reconsider what you thought you knew. What is said and what is unsaid. This is the heart of it. The contracts were about more than business. They were about the delicate space between what was given and what was taken, between control and surrender. A soft breeze stirs the curtain, and you hear the faint rustle of trees in the distance. The room feels even quieter now, as though the world has shrunk down to just this moment, just this room. You wonder if Mylan, too, feels the stillness. Perhaps it is the stillness of the past, the peace that comes from knowing that time is not something to be rushed through but something to be savored, like a sip of tea that you never want to end. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the soft rhythm of the night wash over you. Outside, the city is still there, with its bustling streets and its countless stories, each one just as complex and layered as the last. But inside this room, time feels suspended, caught in the delicate balance of history and memory. Mylan stands again, moving gracefully to the window once more. You can't help but follow her gaze, wondering what she sees. And then, just as quietly, she turns and begins to speak once more, her words drifting like a lullaby. The contracts didn't last forever, but their stories did. And maybe that's the most important thing. You nod slowly, her words sinking in. The contracts may have crumbled, the paper may have faded, but the stories, those would always remain, echoing through the corridors of time and shaping our understanding of history and culture. And so, you let yourself drift, feeling the weight of the past and the present settle around you, knowing that the stories we tell and the contracts we make are what give meaning to the world. The room is still, the city is still, and for a moment, so are you. The silence in the room now feels like a blanket, heavy and comforting, enveloping you in its stillness. The lanterns flicker softly, their warmth a quiet presence in the otherwise cool air. Mylan is no longer by the window, but her words still echo in your mind. Stories that refuse to die. It's a profound realization. How stories, like the one we're immersed in now, have a way of living beyond their time. How they outlast the paper on which they were written, connecting us to the past and shaping our present. You can almost hear the faintest hum of the city outside, the occasional murmur of distant voices drifting through the walls. But here, in this room, the world feels far away. Time doesn't move in the same way. It stretches out, like the shadows cast by the lanterns, slow and lazy. You begin to wonder how many of these courtesans, these e.g., lived their lives under the weight of their contracts. How many of them looked at the ink on their parchment and saw not just the promises of their clients, but the quiet expectations of an entire society. Their role was not just personal but also cultural, shaping the society in which they lived. There's a strange thought that comes to you, something that feels more like a gentle observation than a question. Maybe that was the point of it all. Perhaps it was never about the contracts at all. Maybe the real beauty of these courtesans lay not just in what they could offer their patrons or what the contracts stipulated, but in the delicate dance they performed every day, balancing duty with desire, honor with secrecy, freedom with constraint. Their resilience and grace in the face of such challenges are truly admirable. You let the thought settle, feeling the weight of it in your chest. And then, just like that, it slips away as if it was never truly yours to hold. A quiet lesson from the past, one that you might not fully understand, but one that feels familiar, as if it's always been there, waiting for you to catch up. And now, as the night drapes its final layers over the room, you realize how much of this world has faded. There are no more courtesans with contracts, no more grand tea ceremonies or whispered poetry in dimly lit rooms. Yet the echoes remain. Somewhere in the distance, you can almost hear the faintest notes of a lute being played. Mylan reappears, holding a small tray in her hands. The aroma of tea rises from the cup she places before you, warm and fragrant. It's a simple gesture, but it feels like an offering, a quiet reminder that in this world, the simplest acts can carry the most meaning, and that our actions, no matter how small, can leave a lasting impact. She doesn't speak as you reach for the tea, but the weight of her gaze is enough to remind you of the complexity of this place, of this moment. It's more than just a cup of tea. It's a continuation of the story that's been unfolding, layer by layer, since you first walked into this room. Another thought crosses your mind, this time more practical but still strange. How did they keep track of all the contracts, the details, the fees, the clauses? The Tang dynasty was renowned for its bureaucracy, characterized by meticulous attention to detail and strict adherence to lists and regulations. But what did it take to manage such a delicate network of human interactions? How much ink was spilled over a single night's arrangement? How many records were kept in scrolls like the one you saw earlier? Were they all filed away, stored in quiet archives, waiting to be discovered centuries later? You ponder the implications. It's an odd thing to consider. These were not just personal contracts, they were state-sanctioned. The government was, in a way, complicit in the lives of these women. They were part of the machinery of society, regulated and taxed. And yet, even as they were woven into the social fabric, they existed in the shadows, at the edges of the visible world. The government's involvement, while providing a sense of order and structure, also contributed to the marginalization of these women, highlighting the complex interplay between societal norms and individual agency. This duality, where the government both regulated and marginalized these women, is a testament to the intricate and often contradictory nature of societal structures. A strange tension fills the room, one you can't quite name. It's a palpable feeling, a mix of reverence and unease, as if the weight of history is pressing down on you. You look at the tea in front of you, the ripples stilling on its surface. This moment, like the contracts, feels like something on the edge of being lost to time. It's a fleeting, almost fragile thing, an instant that seems to exist only for you, only here in this room. Do you think anyone will remember the contracts? You ask, not expecting an answer. Mylan pauses, the faintest smile touching her lips as she looks at you. Perhaps not in the way you think. But yes, they will be remembered, not by name, but by their legacy. They were a part of something greater, something that transcended the ink on paper. And in that way, they're immortal. You feel the truth of her words settle in your chest. It's comforting, in a way, that the things we do, the choices we make, even the smallest gestures, carry a weight far beyond our understanding. And though they may fade, they leave behind echoes, little ripples in the fabric of time. Another historical fact comes to light. As the centuries passed, the role of women in society underwent a dramatic shift. The courtesans who had once been celebrated as cultural icons were slowly replaced by other forms of entertainment. This shift, while marking a change in societal values, also led to the loss of a unique cultural tradition. However, their influence persisted in the arts, in literature, and society's perception of beauty and intellect. The legacy of the Iji endures today, woven into the fabric of how we perceive performance, art, and the delicate balance between public and private life. Their influence is evident in the enduring fascination with the arts, the celebration of beauty, and the acknowledgement of the complexities of human relationships. Mylan stands up, her silhouette fading into the shadows. The room feels emptier now, though the warmth of the lanterns still lingers in the corners. She has one final look at you before turning back to the window, her face serene. The night stretches on, but you're no longer in a hurry. You've learned something tonight, something quiet and profound, and perhaps just for this moment that's enough. The tea sits untouched now, cooling slowly, and the stillness of the room deepens, the city beyond lost in the distance. Outside, the night moves on, but inside this small space, time has slowed to a peaceful, endless rhythm. You let the world fall away. You feel your body relaxing even more, as if the very air has softened around you. Something is mesmerizing about this quiet world, a place where the past doesn't demand attention but invites you to lean in, to listen closely to the subtle echoes of long-forgotten voices. The lantern flickers once more, the last bit of flame dancing lazily before it succumbs to the coolness of the night. Mylan is still by the window, but now she seems to be a part of the room itself, as if she's woven into the shadows. For a moment, you wonder if she's not really here at all, but merely a reflection of the stories that have lingered in this place for centuries. But no, she shifts slightly, and the room comes back into focus. You can still hear the distant sounds of the city outside, but they seem far away now. The world of Chang'an, with all its noise and clamor, has faded into the background. It's just you and her and the weight of the past that fills the air. You sit there for a long while, letting the silence stretch. You almost forget to breathe. It's a strange feeling, this quietude. It's not uncomfortable, but it's unfamiliar. The pace of the room is so slow that it almost feels as if time itself is holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for you to catch up. Mylan finally turns toward you, her movements slow and deliberate. She doesn't speak right away, but her gaze is steady. There's something about the way she watches you that makes you feel as though she's seeing something more than just your presence here. It's as if she's looking into you, beyond the surface, as if she's waiting for you to understand something. I've been thinking, you begin, though you're not sure what you're about to say. Do you think the courtesans of the Tang dynasty would have wanted to be remembered like this? In stories? In history? Her smile is soft, almost sad, as she considers your question. They were artists, she says slowly, her voice like a murmur in the room. They didn't want to be remembered just as courtesans. They wanted to be remembered for their art, for their minds, for their beauty, yes, but also for their intelligence, their grace. They didn't live in the shadows of their roles. They lived in the light of their craft. The room feels even warmer now, as if her words have breathed life into it. For a brief moment, the past and the present blur, and you see them, those courtesans, not as figures from history, but as people. Real people with dreams and fears, just like anyone else. You remember the contracts, the rules, and the formalities. But in the end, what they had was not just a piece of paper. It was a space, an intimate space, where they could perform their art, create their own identities, and influence the world around them in subtle, profound ways. Another historical detail emerges. In many of the records, it's clear that the courtesans of the Tang dynasty were not just involved in the realm of entertainment. They played key roles in shaping the culture. Their poetry was highly regarded, their music admired by the elite. It was said that a well-composed poem could make or break a political alliance, and a skilled courtesan could change the course of history with a well-placed metaphor. Yet, even in their prestige, they were often seen as something less than human. Their status as public figures, highly celebrated though they were, didn't protect them from the biases of society. They were revered for their talents, but expectations of femininity, beauty, and submission still constrained their roles. In the end, they could balance these contradictions that made them so fascinating, so captivating to the men and women who sought their company. Do you think that, you ask, your voice almost lost in the quiet, the courtesans ever had moments of true freedom? Mylan looks at you, her eyes thoughtful. Freedom? Yes, but only in small doses. True freedom, the kind that exists without restraint, was a luxury they couldn't afford. But in their way, they were free. Free in their art, free in their self-expression. Free to choose their patrons. They were artists who understood that freedom was never about escaping from something. It was about creating something new, something of their own. You nod, understanding now. The courtesans were not just the subjects of stories. They were the creators of them. They took the framework of their society and their roles and reshaped it into something that could never be fully understood. They were the ones who carved their own spaces in the world, in between the rules, in between the contracts. They found ways to exist in the margins and still shine, a testament to their resilience and creativity that inspires us even today. Another fleeting thought comes to you, like a whisper in the dark. In some ways, nothing has changed. Women today still navigate a world of expectations, some obvious, others subtle. And while the contracts have changed, the art of negotiation, of carving out a space for yourself, remains the same. You realize you're not just learning about the past, you're learning about the present. You're seeing reflections of the world you know now, but filtered through the lens of history. The courtesans may be long gone, but their legacy remains, stitched into the very fabric of our understanding of power, art, and human connection. Their influence is not a distant echo, but a living thread that connects us to our past. As you sit there in the quiet of the room, the candlelight flickering softly in the corners, you can't help but feel a sense of peace. The world outside, with all its noise and chaos, seems so far away now. In this moment, there's only you, the room, and the history that lingers in the walls. The contracts are gone. The courtesans are gone. But the stories, oh, the stories. They are not just tales of the past, but living narratives that engage us, passed from one generation to the next, quietly unfolding like the soft petals of a flower. You lean back again, feeling the gentle pull of sleep. The room, the city, even the very air seems to be urging you to rest. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the silence wash over you, knowing that tomorrow, the world will still be here. But tonight, in this quiet space, everything is just as it should be. You feel yourself drifting again, the pull of sleep settling like a soft fog around you. The room has grown even quieter now, the soft rustling of silk against skin the only sound. Outside, the world continues, but here, in this moment, time feels stretched. like an endless sigh that can never be exhaled. The air is heavy, not with weight, but with calm. Mylan has gone. You're unsure when she left, but you didn't hear her move. Only the faintest brush of silk as she slipped away, leaving the room as still as it had been when you first arrived. You sit there for a while, your fingers brushing the edges of the teacup. It's cold now, just like the air in the room, but the feeling it left lingers, as though the warmth hasn't quite vanished yet. As you reflect, the nature of this quiet, regulated world begins to unfold more clearly in your mind. The contracts, the rules, the fine print were never just about keeping order. They were about maintaining a delicate balance. Power wasn't only in the hands of those who signed the documents, nor was it just in the hands of those who performed the roles. It existed somewhere in between, the delicate back and forth, the negotiation of desire and power, and the soft, unspoken agreement that held it all together. A strange thought begins to creep into your mind. Was that the true beauty of these contracts? The balance they offered? In a world of turbulence and change, something was reassuring about the way these agreements existed. Rigid in form, yet fluid in meaning. The ink on the page was just the beginning. The real work, the real story, lived in the spaces between the lines, in the moments of connection and performance, in the way these women moved through the world with both grace and purpose. A historical fact enters your thoughts, one that you'd almost forgotten about. It was not only the courtesans of the Tang dynasty who lived under the watchful eyes of society, but also the ordinary women, who were often expected to marry, produce children, and stay within the home. Courtesans, in their way, were afforded a certain level of freedom that was not given to their peers. They could express themselves freely, at least in terms of their art, while the average woman was expected to conform to rigid societal expectations. The same laws did not bind them, but they were certainly not free from scrutiny. Mylan's earlier words replay in your mind. Freedom is never about escaping from something. It's about creating something new. It's a sentiment you find yourself reflecting on as the quiet stretches between the walls. In their contracts, the courtesans had not just negotiated their roles, they had created their own spaces. In this performance space, they could exercise power, express themselves, and navigate their worlds, even within the constraints of society. They were, in a way, redefining what freedom meant. Another thought flickers into your mind. In many ways, this delicate dance, the creation of space in a world full of rules, isn't so different from the world you live in today. The contracts may no longer be written in ink on parchment, but you still see people creating their own spaces. Maybe it's in art, in music, in words, or perhaps it's simply in the choices they make about who they are and how they move through the world. It strikes you then how much these courtesans of the past were ahead of their time, how they used their art as a tool to challenge societal boundaries, to move between worlds, and to blur the lines between who they were expected to be and who they chose to be. They didn't simply submit to their roles, they shaped them. They utilized their space in the world to create new possibilities and new ways of being and living. You think back to the contracts once signed in these rooms, carefully written, legally binding, and full of clauses and terms that spelled out everything, down to the last detail. There were no surprises, no moments of confusion. Yet, in the small spaces between those contracts, in the delicate art of negotiation, the real power of the courtesans lay. Their art was their voice. It was the thread that connected them to the world, the invisible line that tied their worth not just to the men who signed the contracts but to the society that demanded performance. Another small, obscure fact comes to light. In some instances, courtesans with a strong reputation could command astronomical fees for their time. These women were not only entertainers. They were also cultural icons, highly respected and sought after by poets, scholars, and political figures alike. Their influence in intellectual circles was immense, and they were often invited to courts and banquets not just for their beauty but also for their intellect. It was this unique combination of beauty, art, and intellect that made them both revered and feared. They were symbols of power in a world that often looked down on women in general, yet they occupied a space that was as much about mental prowess as it was about sensuality. The more talented and accomplished the courtesan, the higher the demand for her services would be. In this sense, the contracts were not just a reflection of a market-driven economy, they were a reflection of a system that valued the interplay between intellect, beauty, and influence. The thought settles on you. In many ways, we still live in that world today, don't we? One where a person's value is often tied to their ability to perform, to entertain, and to inspire. The past doesn't truly leave us. It morphs and shifts, but it's always there, quietly influencing the way we think and the way we live. It was true in the Tang dynasty, and it's still true now. The world is still negotiating, still trying to balance desire and power, freedom and constraint. Our present is deeply rooted in our past, and understanding this connection is crucial to navigating our future. You realize, almost reluctantly, that the story of the courtesans isn't just a story about the past. It's a story about how we continue to negotiate our place in the world, shaping our own identities in a society that often tries to define us. It's a reminder that we have the power to shape our narratives and define ourselves on our terms, despite the pressures and expectations of society. Mylan's presence lingers still, even though she's no longer in the room. It's almost as though she's been woven into the fabric of this moment, a reminder that even the smallest gestures, like a sip of tea, a conversation, or a contract, can carry the weight of 1,000 years. Her smile, her quiet grace, speaks not just of an ancient world, but of a timeless dance, one that we're all still part of. The room is quiet again, but you don't mind. The silence is peaceful now, a companion rather than a void. You take a deep breath, letting the stillness settle around you, and in this moment you feel at peace. You feel like you've understood something quiet, something profound. And just as gently, the city outside fades away. The room, the tea, the memory of the contracts. All of it fades slowly into the night. The room is quiet again, the soft flicker of the lantern the only movement. For a while, you sit there, your mind wandering, carrying with it the images of courtesans, contracts, and the delicate balance of human desires. The outside world, with its noise and busyness, feels so distant now, as if the ancient world has wrapped you in its embrace, pulling you away from everything else. The stories of the courtesans, of the men who sought their company, and the contracts they signed. These things seem to swirl in your mind, like the smoke of incense that lingers long after it has burned. The past and the present start to blend, and you realize, almost absently, that this quiet room has become a space not just for rest, but for reflection. The contracts, the delicate artistry of negotiation, they've all started to make sense in a way you didn't expect. But there's one more thought you need to address, the question of freedom. It's been on your mind ever since Mylan mentioned it. Freedom, she said, was not about escaping. It was about creating something new. But what does that mean? How do you create freedom in a world so full of constraints, so full of rules and expectations? It's a question that lingers in your mind as you sit there, feeling the weight of history pressing gently against you. In the world of the courtesans, freedom wasn't something that could be taken for granted. They lived in a world where their very existence was bound by societal expectations, by contracts, by the roles they were expected to play. And yet, despite all of that, they found ways to create something new. Their resilience, their use of art, intelligence, and beauty, sometimes all at once, to carve out spaces for themselves is truly inspiring. In a way, it's almost poetic. The way they took what was given to them, an existence defined by contracts, and turned it into something uniquely their own. They were, in essence, the architects of their own identities, even within the boundaries that society set for them. A historical fact drifts through your thoughts. As much as courtesans were revered for their beauty and intellect, they were also objects of fascination and desire. Men sought them for companionship, yes, but they also sought them as status symbols, as representations of taste and refinement. The courtesans' influence wasn't just limited to the intimate spaces they inhabited. They were, in many ways, symbols of the power dynamics of the Tang dynasty. The contracts they signed weren't just about services rendered. They were part of the larger social fabric, where desire, power, and reputation intertwined. But what happens when the desire fades? When the contracts are no longer relevant? When the women who once inhabited these spaces are forgotten, their names lost to time? Do their stories still matter? As you sit there, feeling the weight of history pressed gently on your shoulders, you realize the answer. The stories always matter. The contracts may be forgotten. The courtesans may be gone. But their stories, their legacies, are still here, woven into the fabric of our understanding of the past. Their ability to carve out spaces for themselves and define their own identities in the face of societal constraints is not just a historical footnote, but a significant part of our collective narrative. Another small, obscure fact enters your mind. Some courtesans, in their later years, became respected elders in the community. They were consulted for their wisdom and invited to social gatherings for their intellect. And in some cases, their poetry and music became so famous that they were immortalized in the works of later writers and artists. It's a testament to the transformative power of time, how someone who was once seen as a fleeting figure of desire could, over time, become a symbol of intellectual and artistic achievement. Mylan's words come back to you again. Freedom is not about escaping from something. It's about creating something new. You wonder if she ever truly understood how much of her own life was about creating art, creating identity, and carving out spaces for herself in a world that often tried to define her. But the truth is, we all do it, don't we? We all create spaces for ourselves. Whether it's through our work, our art, our relationships, or even the stories we tell, we are constantly negotiating with the world around us, trying to carve out our own space. The courtesans of the Tang dynasty were no different. They used their beauty, their intellect, and their art to create spaces for themselves in a world that had very little room for them. You let that thought settle in your chest, warm and steady. And as you sit there, surrounded by the quiet, the feeling of peace washes over you once again. The contracts may be long gone, and the courtesans may have faded from history, but their legacy remains in the quiet spaces they created. The legacy of their stories, their art, and their negotiations is still here, waiting for you to listen. Another historical tidbit, one that's easy to overlook, comes to light. The decline of the Tang dynasty marked the beginning of a shift in how society viewed courtesans. The highly structured world of contracts and poetry slowly gave way to a more commercialized, less romanticized version of the same system. As the centuries passed, courtesans were no longer viewed as cultural icons but rather as commodities, objects of desire to be bought and sold. The shift in how they were perceived was a direct result of the changes in the political and economic systems of the time. The once elevated courtesan had become, in some cases, just another commodity in a growing market. But even as the courtesan's social status declined, their influence never truly disappeared. It's fascinating how even in a world that commodifies everything, there are still things, stories, legacies, that resist being reduced to simple transactions. You take one last, slow breath, feeling the weight of it all settle comfortably into your chest. The stories of the courtesans, of the contracts, of the negotiations, they're all part of the tapestry of human history. And just like any tapestry, the threads that hold it all together are made up of moments, big and small, seen and unseen, heard and unheard. The city outside continues, but inside, everything is quiet. The lantern flickers one last time, casting its soft light across the room. And as you close your eyes, you realize that even as the world moves on, some stories never truly fade. They linger, waiting for you to listen, to reflect, to remember. The room grows even quieter now, the air thick with a peaceful silence. It feels like time itself has decided to slow down, stretching out this moment longer than you could have ever expected. You could almost forget that the world outside still spins at its usual breakneck pace. Here, within these walls, everything is still, serene, and layered with the gentle remnants of the past. You glance around the room again, a space that once housed the vibrant lives of the courtesans. You notice the small, delicate details that seem to make it whole, like the faint scent of incense that lingers in the air or the soft creak of the wooden floorboards beneath your feet. It's the kind of space where history seems to breathe, not as a distant memory, but as a quiet, living presence that feels as close as the beat of your own heart. Mylan, the enigmatic figure who guided you through this journey, is no longer in sight. Yet somehow, she's still there, woven into the fabric of the room, her presence lingering like a whisper just out of reach. You wonder what she would say if she were here now, What would she think of the questions still running through your mind, the things you've yet to understand fully? You close your eyes for a moment, letting the stillness take over. The sound of your breath fills the room, soft and steady, almost like the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves of a distant tree. In this quiet space, the world feels lighter. The past and the present seem to merge, no longer separate but one continuous thread. You think about the contracts once signed, the promises written in ink that dictated the terms of the courtesans' lives. How many were forgotten? How many were discarded, lost to the passage of time? And yet, here you are in this room, in this quiet moment, and the contracts have come to life again. Not through the ink, but through the stories they've left behind. Stories of women who carved their paths, who found ways to navigate the complex web of power, desire, and expectation. The weight of history still presses gently against your shoulders, but now it feels more like a comforting embrace. You realize that, in some ways, you've become part of the story, too. You've walked into this world, into this room, and you've allowed yourself to listen, to absorb. You've let the stories of the courtesans, their contracts, and their lives unfold around you. The quiet is soothing. The lanterns flicker softly, casting their warm glow across the room. But it's not just the light that makes the space feel alive. It's the stories, the legacy, and the threads that connect the past to the present. Another thought comes to you, like a quiet revelation. The courtesans were not just symbols of desire. They were symbols of resilience. In a world that constantly sought to define them, they described themselves. Through their art, their intellect, and their beauty, they found ways to resist and to push back against the expectations placed upon them. They were not just women of pleasure. They were women of power, inspiring us with their strength and determination. It strikes you then that this wasn't just about the contracts, the ink, or the clauses. It was about the way the courtesans used what they had, what they were given, to shape their own identities. They navigated a world full of constraints, and in doing so, they created their form of freedom. You think back to Mylan's words. Freedom is not about escaping from something. It's about creating something new. You've heard that line so many times now, and yet, it feels different each time. You realize it's not just a statement about the courtesans' lives. It's a reflection of your own. The contracts may have been rigid, but the women who signed them found ways to bend those lines. They turned their roles into something more, something that transcended the words written on paper. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about reinvention. They took the structures of their world and shaped them into something uniquely their own. And that's what made them so remarkable. Another historical fact settles into your mind. Its weight not heavy but steady. Some courtesans were so skilled in their craft that they were able to transcend their original roles. They became cultural icons, not just for their beauty, but also for their significant contributions to the arts and intellectual life. Their poetry and music, once confined to the private rooms of patrons, found their way into the public sphere. They became part of the larger cultural conversation, respected not just for their bodies but for their minds. It's a reminder that, in the end, it wasn't the contracts that defined them, it was what they did with the opportunities they were given. You sit in the silence of the room, your thoughts swirling, and for the first time, you feel as though you understand the actual depth of what the courtesans represented. They were not just part of a forgotten chapter in history. They were part of a much larger story. A story about how we navigate our roles in society, how we create spaces for ourselves, and how we use what we have to shape who we are. And in this moment, you are an integral part of understanding and continuing their story. In the quiet stillness of the room, you feel a sense of peace wash over you. The questions that once seemed so heavy now feel lighter, softer. The past no longer feels like a distant, unreachable place. It feels like a living, breathing thing woven into the present, into your own life. You take a deep breath, letting the silence fill your lungs, and for the first time, you realize that you've found what you were looking for. Not just answers, but a deeper understanding. A quiet connection to the past, to the courtesans, to their contracts, and to the way their stories have lived on in the spaces between the lines. And in that moment, you realize the past is never truly gone. It's always with us, lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for us to listen. This enduring nature of history connects us to the past and its influence on the present, making us feel a part of a continuous narrative. As you close your eyes once again, the room falls even quieter, and you let yourself drift, knowing that the stories will remain, woven into the fabric of your mind, waiting to be remembered again. Somewhere nearby, a floorboard creaks, not loudly, not urgently, just enough to remind you that the world is still there, creaking and sighing and stretching its limbs in the middle of the night. You don't open your eyes right away. There's no need. You're wrapped in something softer than sleep and more profound than thought. But eventually, you blink. The room hasn't changed. It's still the same quiet chamber in the middle of ancient Chang'an, still lit by a flickering lantern that refuses to die. The walls are still lined with soft wood, and the air still carries that familiar blend of tea leaves, ink, and old silk. What has changed is you. You feel slower, heavier in the best way, like a book that's finally figured out what story it wants to tell. The story, it turns out, is quieter than you expected, less dramatic, more layered. You didn't think a tale about contracts and courtesans would pull you in like this. But here you are, still listening, feeling the pulse of a world long gone. Mylan has returned. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. The space between you is filled with everything you've already shared. And everything that doesn't need to be said is a testament to the beauty of unspoken understanding. You sip the tea she's poured, and this time you notice. It's jasmine. Sweet and earthy, with just enough bitterness to remind you it's real. Tastes like memory, or maybe like a conversation that never made it onto paper. You look like you've been thinking, she says finally, and you both laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's true. You tell her your latest thought. How strange it is that a civilization so advanced, so obsessed with contracts and scrolls and paperwork, still left so much up to unspoken understanding. She nods. That's the art of it, she says. The contract is never the whole story. It's just the spine. Everything else, the music, the glances, the pauses, that's what makes it come alive. A historical fact swirls into place. In many of these contracts, there were specific clauses about silence. Yes, silence. A client might request quiet evenings, with no music or poems, just presence. In those cases, a courtesan's job was to be present without performing. A companion of silence, professional at stillness. You think about that, how rare it is, even today, to share a moment of silence without awkwardness. But these courtesans, they mastered it. They turned quiet into something you could pay for, something sacred, something that said, I see you even when you say nothing. Their mastery of shared silence is truly a wonder to behold. It's both odd and beautiful. A weird cultural detail tickles your mind next. Some courtesans, especially those who were particularly famous, had waiting lists. Patrons could sign contracts in advance, reserving a specific evening weeks or months in the future. And if you were foolish enough to cancel without notice, there were fees, penalties, possibly a poem mocking you publicly. Courtesans had reputations to protect. You don't ghost a woman who can rhyme about your bald spot in 6 different dialects. You smile at the thought. Mylan catches it and raises an eyebrow. You thinking of skipping your appointment? She teases. Never, you reply, holding your hands up in mock defense. Not after what I've learned. The room seems to warm again, even as the candle burns lower. The shadows on the walls shift lazily, like they're enjoying the evening too. You're not sure how much time has passed. It doesn't matter. This world doesn't keep track of hours. It keeps track of moments. You bring up another question. Were there courtesans who never signed contracts? Who didn't play by the rules? Mylan leans back, considering. Oh yes, they existed. But it wasn't easy. Without a contract, you had no protection, no payment guarantee, no way to enforce boundaries. And yet, some chose that path. Usually the bold ones, the artists who cared more about their craft than their coin, or the ones too wounded to trust ink. Their courage in choosing a more challenging path is genuinely admirable. There's something heavy in that last line. You let it sit, Because not every story is wrapped in silk and elegance. Some are rough-edged, messy, just like now, just like always. You ask about those women, the ones who didn't sign, those who relied solely on reputation. Mylan's voice is quieter now. They walked a harder road. Some were admired, others forgotten. A few became legends. It hits you slowly that this history, this beautiful, slow, layered history, is not just about the contracts, or the courtesans, or even the empire. It's about the things we agree to and the things we don't. The roles we choose and the ones we reject. It's about power. Not the kind that wears a crown, but the kind that sits quietly across from you, sipping tea and asking soft questions that stay with you long after the night ends. You look around the room again. The silence is perfect now. Not empty, full. And you realize this is what the contracts couldn't capture. The feeling of trust, the unspoken assurance that the other person will be there when you need them. Of respect, the mutual understanding and acceptance of each other's values and boundaries. Of mutual presence, the shared experience of being in the same space, both physically and emotionally. And for a moment, it makes you think about your own life. Not in a heavy way, just gently. The small, silent negotiations you have every day. The invisible agreements, like the unspoken understanding between friends or the trust in a long-term relationship. The roles you play, like the supportive friend or the responsible employee. The moments you want to remember and the ones you're still writing. You glance at Mylan, wondering if she's thinking the same thing. Probably not. She's already living it. Outside, a dog barks. Somewhere, a door slides open and shut. But here in this room, the only sound is the hush of memory, still unfolding. The lantern flickers again, fighting off the last edges of darkness. And you smile, because now you know, the ink fades, the paper crumbles. But the story stays. The flame in the lantern flutters one final time before surrendering. The room goes dim, not dark, just dim enough to soften the world's edges. You don't panic. You don't even blink. Feels right, like the night is asking everyone to lower their voices, to speak in whispers or not at all. Mylan doesn't move. She sits quietly, lit now only by the glow of the moon peeking through a paper window. Her shadow stretches across the floor, long and still. She seems more like a memory than a person now. Maybe she always was. You're deep into the night. However, this story is still not finished. You shift slightly, careful not to break the calm. Your fingers brush the rim of your teacup, now cold. It doesn't matter. The warmth you feel isn't coming from the cup anymore. It's in your chest, your thoughts, and your slow, steady breath. You think again about those women, the courtesans of the Tang dynasty, who navigated one of the most sophisticated societies on earth with nothing more than a contract and a song. They weren't rebels, not in a loud way, but they were revolutionary in their quietness, in their control over their craft, their time, their value. Their resilience in the face of societal constraints is genuinely inspiring. Mylan's voice breaks the silence, her words unexpected. Do you want to know what happens after the contract ends? She asks, her tone calm and measured. You didn't expect the question, but you nod. Of course you want to know. She pauses. It depends, she says. Sometimes it ends peacefully. A farewell gift, a final poem, a nod. Other times not so clean. Some patrons grow too attached. Who forgets the contract is only for a time. You wait. She turns now, her face soft in the moonlight. And there are courtesans who feel the same, even though they know better. It's a revelation that catches you off guard. You've spent so much time studying the contracts, the structure, and the rules. But this is the part that never makes it into the archives. The feelings, the blurred lines, the way people, regardless of dynasty, always manage to complicate even the most explicit agreement. A historical fact tugs at your sleeve. Toward the end of the Tang era, it became increasingly common for patrons to attempt to buy out courtesans. Not in the way of rescue as romanticized later. More like property. They offered large sums, hoping to convert a contract into permanent exclusivity. In some cases, it worked. In many, it didn't. Courtesans understood something that often escaped the men who sought them. Permanence was an illusion. Love, like contracts, had terms. You glance at Mylan. Her eyes hold 1,000 stories. So what did they do? You ask. The ones who fell in love? She sighs. Some left. Some stayed. Some burned everything down and started over. But most just carried on. Performed as usual. Because that's what you do when the contract says the show must go on. You sit with that. It's not tragic. It's just true. Real life rarely wraps itself in neat endings. Even in a world defined by scrolls and signatures, human hearts are not so easily arranged. An obscure cultural fact emerges next. Courtesans often wrote their own closing verses when a contract came to an end. These were not always sad. Many were playful, even mocking. One preserved poem ends with the line, "He paid for 3 days, but only remembered 2. A burn, Tang style. You smile. It's comforting to know pettiness is eternal. You wonder suddenly about the scribes, the men and occasionally women who drafted these contracts. Did they take pride in their work? Did they gossip about the clients who requested ridiculous clauses? Did they roll their eyes while writing, "Absolutely no onions at dinner"? Ever? Probably. Bureaucrats are the same in every era. You ask Mylan what scribes were paid. Not much, she replies. But their writing lasted longer than anyone else's. You like that? There's something strangely noble about being underpaid and over-remembered. The room falls silent again, but it's not the same silence. This one feels like the end of an act. Not the end of the play, just that brief moment when the curtain lowers and everyone exhales. You've come to understand something else now. Contracts aren't just about business. They're about closure. They give people a way to say, "This was real even if it didn't last." In a society that demanded order, that prized appearance and reputation, the contract wasn't just a legal tool, it was emotional armor. It allowed both parties to feel protected, even if only on paper. Another fact slips in, soft as silk. In some cases, courtesans kept every contract they ever signed. Stacked neatly, wrapped in red ribbon, tucked away in lacquered chests. Not as trophies, as memories, as proof that their time, each hour, each night had value. They were historians of their own lives, archiving every name, every moment. You wonder how many of those bundles still exist, hidden in some forgotten storeroom or buried beneath layers of dust in a crumbling archive. Probably none. And yet, maybe one. Maybe that's what Mylan is. Not a ghost, not a dream. A story keeper. A contract bound not by ink, but memory. You stretch your legs, careful not to disturb the air too much. There's a profound comfort in stillness, in knowing you don't have to solve anything. You only have to witness it. Mylan stands now. She doesn't say goodbye. She doesn't need to. She bows her head, a movement full of grace and quiet endings. You watch her leave, the way her shadow folds into the hallway. And then you are alone again, but not empty. The contract has ended. The story has paused. But something about this moment feels permanent. Not in the way that ink lasts, in the way that stories do. They transcend time and space, connecting us to the past and the present, and reminding us of the enduring power of human experiences. You sit alone now, not lonely, just alone. It's the kind of aloneness that feels earned. Like finishing a book at 3 a.m. or waking up in an empty house to the sound of birds. Quiet, peaceful, and strangely proud. You've made it this far. You've followed the trail of tea leaves and paper scrolls, of whispered verses and featherlight silk, deep into a world most people never knew existed. And now it's just you, the hush of the room, and the echo of Mylan's last steps. She's gone. Truly, this time. You imagine she's walked into another story. One with different guests, different lanterns, and maybe a different tea set. She's probably telling someone else a version of the same tale, same outline, new pauses. That's how history works, after all. It's never said the same twice. Not because people forget, but because people remember different things. You wonder what you'll remember. Maybe it'll be the contract clause about silence. Or the fact that some courtesans find clients for bad poetry. Or perhaps it'll just be the way Mylan's voice felt like a warm blanket. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you were here. You showed up. You listened. And in doing so, you, the reader, became an integral part of the story too. Your presence, your attention, and your understanding all contribute to the unfolding of this narrative. The room seems larger now, with no one else in it. The shadows stretch farther. The lantern has gone out completely, but moonlight still slips in through the rice paper window, washing the floor in soft silver. It feels appropriate, this pale light. Gentle, detached, timeless. It doesn't care what hour it is, or how many sections are left in this story. It just glows. You stretch again, rolling your shoulders. The floor creaks beneath you, a familiar sound now. You've come to appreciate the quiet details in this place. The little imperfections. The smell of old ink. The way the tea cools unevenly. The way silence settles like dust. And you think maybe that's what those old contracts did. Not control. Not commodify, but capture. A moment. An understanding. A boundary drawn in brushstrokes and etiquette. They were blueprints for encounters in a world that didn't believe in permanence. After all, everything in Tang dynasty Chang'an was moving. Merchants, travelers, lovers, poets. The city was alive. And amid all that movement, the contract said, stop. Pause. Let's agree to something, even if only for an evening. Strangely comforting. Here's a final obscure fact for tonight. Some courtesans would refuse contracts from men who came too often, not out of cruelty, but to preserve novelty. This practice was a testament to the value they placed on anticipation and the importance of maintaining a sense of mystery. There was a saying among them, too much familiarity turns poetry into soup, and no one wants emotional broth. You chuckle at that, alone in the dark, because it's ridiculous, but also deeply wise. The EG knew their worth, and part of that worth came from distance, from maintaining a veil of mystery. Even in an age of open markets and paper trails, they understood the power of restraint. You think about that word, restraint. It was everywhere in their lives. In the music, never too fast. In the painting, it is never too bold. In the gestures, they are precise and measured. Even in the way they poured tea. 3 fingers on the pot. Always counterclockwise. Never refill without permission. And you felt that restraint all night. Not as a limit, as a design. You begin to understand the architecture of this world, the Tang dynasty. The unspoken rules and the value placed on anticipation, on subtlety, on space. These were not just personal preferences but societal norms that shaped every aspect of life in this era. Modern life doesn't leave much room for that. Everything is loud, fast, optimized. But in this room, things unfold. They don't perform. They reveal. You breathe a little deeper. Let yourself remember how to move slowly. Another fact hums in your memory. When the Tang dynasty fell, the formal contract system began to erode. Later dynasties didn't always uphold the same structures. The cultural respect for courtesans waned. The bureaucracy tightened. The art loosened. Eventually, most of the elegance was replaced with economics. It's not a tragic ending. Just change. Like a lantern flickering out when the sun rises. You let that sink in. Because even though the contracts faded, the essence remained. The legacy, the echoes, the fact that you're here in 2025 sitting with this story proves that. Stories outlast signatures. You rise slowly now, not because it's time to leave, but because your body wants to stretch. You feel taller somehow, lighter. The floorboards creak again, and you're not surprised. They've been part of the story all along. There's no scroll in your hand, no signature on a line. But there's something else, something softer, a memory, presence, a whisper of a life once lived on paper, now retold through you. You look around one last time. The tea tray sits quietly, still half full. A lute rests in the corner, untouched but humming with potential. The window shows a pale sky now, as the early morning begins to creep in. And you realize, this contract never needed ink. It needed time. It needed attention. This story needed someone to care enough to listen, to give it the attention it deserved. And you did. And you did. So, perhaps tonight wasn't just a story. It was an agreement between you and the past. A pact to preserve, to appreciate, and to find wonder in even the most boring parts of history. You smile, not because anything amusing happened, but because you're grateful. And in this quiet, moonlit room, with no audience, no applause, and no need for performance, you bow your head softly and let yourself just be. The morning doesn't rush. It arrives slowly, like a lazy cat stretching into the corners of the room. Pale light slips through the rice paper panels, softening everything it touches. You don't feel startled or hurried, just more awake in a world that still hasn't asked anything of you. The lanterns are cold now. The tea is colder. But none of that matters. You're still here, still wrapped in a blanket of quiet, your thoughts thick with stories and candle smoke. There's no need to move yet. You sit, letting your eyes wander. The contract has ended. The woman is gone. The story has mostly been told. But you're not quite ready to leave. And history, as it turns out, doesn't mind lingering. You reach for the scroll, the one the scribe had read earlier. It's still there, rolled tight, bound in red thread. You untie it slowly. The paper crackles faintly, like old snow underfoot. The ink is still legible, though faded at the edges. And suddenly, rereading it feels different. Now you know more. Now you've seen what isn't written. The list includes terms such as number of nights, fees, meals, and optional poetry recitations. But between the lines, you hear laughter, hesitation, the scrape of a chair on a polished floor, the sound of someone choosing which version of themselves to be. There's something tender about it. You trace a finger down the brush strokes, wondering how many hands touched the scroll before yours. How many people took comfort in rules? How many found freedom in boundaries? Or at least tried to? A fact returns to you clearer now. Even when the formal contract system began to disappear, echoes of it remained in other forms. In rituals, in etiquette, in the way people said goodbye even when no paper said they had to. The idea of agreement, the mutual understanding between two people, outlasted the bureaucratic language. You look back at the window. The sky is a soft gray-blue now, like it's still deciding how bright to get. The world outside is waking up, but slowly. You're grateful for that. You're not ready for anything loud. A strange, quiet fact drifts in like dust. Some retired courtesans, especially those who had reached high status, opened their tea houses later in life. Not brothels, not salons, just quiet spaces where people could come, sip something warm, and listen to stories. They didn't advertise. They didn't perform. But if you were lucky enough to sit at their table, they might share a piece of the past that no scroll ever held. You smile. You'd sit in that tea house forever if you could. You wonder how many people knew the whole lives of the women they visited. How many knew their favorite flowers, the songs they hated, whether they preferred their tea bitter or sweet. Probably not many, but it's the learning that matters most. Isn't it? You think of Mylan again. You don't know where she is now. You don't know if she was ever real, but her voice still hums in your memory like a song with no end. The one who taught you about restraint, about slow power, about choosing your pauses as carefully as your words. You think about how she defined freedom, not as escape but as creation. You understand that better now. Freedom isn't something you wait for. It's something you shape slowly with the tools you have. A voice, a brush, a glance, a contract you control, a refusal to be reduced. You rise from your seat. Your legs are stiff, but your heart feels light. You don't look for your shoes right away. You stand there, letting the weight of the morning settle into your bones. The room smells of wood and old books. It's a smell that might follow you. You tidy the teacups, not because you have to, but because it feels respectful. A way of saying thank you without words. A quiet nod to everyone who came before you. A last fact flickers in. Some courtesans wrote letters to themselves. Not diaries, not notes, just short letters sealed and hidden. Some have been found, centuries later, in the walls of old homes or behind loose floorboards. Little time capsules. Some were poetic. Others were blunt. One read, "He forgot my name." I didn't. You fold the scroll gently. You won't take it with you. It doesn't belong to you. But it feels right to hold it once more, just for a breath. Outside, a merchant's bell rings somewhere down the street. It's a soft chime, more polite than urgent. The city is beginning to stir. But inside this room, time still stretches like silk. You take one final look around. The loot in the corner. The cushions slightly flattened where you sat. The ink-stained brush is still resting on its stand. You bow your head, not as a goodbye, but as a closing line. You've stayed longer than expected. But the story welcomed you anyway. That's the thing about slow history, it doesn't shove you out the door. It lets you linger, wander, and get lost. And if you listen closely, it even enables you to feel a sense of belonging. You slip quietly toward the door. The paper screen slides open with a whisper. The morning air meets your face, cool and kind. You don't rush into the street. You don't need to, because part of you is still in that room. And part of that room is now in you. You step into the street, and the world greets you gently. Chang'an is awake, but only just. The sun hasn't made up its mind yet. It's still hiding behind the clouds, casting everything in a soft, silvery blur. The market stalls are half open. The shopkeepers stretch and sweep. A dog yawns in the alleyway and returns to sleep. Even the city seems reluctant to rush, embracing the tranquility of the early morning, a serene moment before the bustling day begins. You stroll, and for once no one hurries you. You pass a few early risers. A monk in silent sandals, a courier with a scroll tucked under his arm, and a noodle vendor who offers you a nod. No one says much. Perhaps they sense it, that you've just returned from somewhere most people never get to visit. Not a brothel, not a tea room, but a piece of history, a feeling, a truth that hums quietly beneath the noise of everyday life. You wonder if anyone else remembers Mylan, the woman whose story has become a part of your journey. You wonder if she ever truly existed, or maybe she was an idea, stitched together from thousands of women who once lived, worked, created, and loved in this very city. Perhaps that's why her stories felt so real, because they were built from truth, even if her name was fiction. You look at the scroll again in your mind, not to reread it, but to remember what it meant. An agreement, a boundary, promise, but not just on paper. As you continue your stroll, a thought settles gently onto your shoulder. Stories like Mylan's are not fragile because they're untrue, but because they're quiet, easily overlooked in the cacophony of history. Not because they're untrue, but because they're quiet. History doesn't always make room for quiet, prefers noise, kings and battles, decrees and revolutions. But here, in these corners, between tea sips, between brush strokes, some stories shaped people just as much, perhaps even more. Another fact curls up beside you. In later dynasties, many e.g. were rebranded not as artists or courtesans but as entertainers. Their political voices were silenced. Their poetry was dismissed. They became a novelty decoration. And yet, somehow, their echoes still reached you. That says something. You pause at a bridge, leaning over the side. A small stream trickles below. You watch it meander over stones, twisting around obstacles without complaint. That's what Mylan's voice was like. Not loud, not crashing, just constant, unbothered, eternal. You think of all the invisible agreements you've made in your own life, how often you've performed a version of yourself to fit a moment, a room, or a role. Maybe we all carry a little Mylan inside us. That quiet defiance. That needs to be more than what we're paid for. Mylan's story is not just about a woman, but about a spirit of quiet defiance that inspires us all. You chuckle. A man nearby eyes you curiously. You smile back, like someone who just heard a joke from 1,200 years ago. The past isn't past. It's just waiting for someone patient enough to listen. The value of history and storytelling lies in our willingness to listen, to hear the voices that echo through time, and to understand the lessons they carry. You keep walking, A bakery opens its shutters. Steam rises from a bamboo basket. The scent is warm, sweet, and unfamiliar. You consider stopping, but you're already full with stories, with thoughts, with the kind of memory that doesn't fit into words. One last strange cultural note floats into your mind, like a feather on the wind. In certain provinces, courtesans weren't buried in cemeteries. They were given stone markers, yes, but often hidden. Not because they were shamed, but because some believed their souls still wandered. Not cursed, just unfinished. Stories mid-sentence. The ink never dried. You feel the truth in that. There are always parts of us that remain unwritten. Parts that slip between official records, between history books and headlines. But that doesn't mean they're gone. It means they're waiting. You reach the edge of the district. The quiet part of the city gives way to more movement now. Carts, voices, and a dog chasing a child who is not supposed to have that bun. You pause. It would be easy to rejoin the noise, to fold the memory into your pocket and move on. But you don't. Not yet. You let the stillness linger one last time. You take a slow, final breath, the kind you take before stepping out of a dream, and you say softly, whether to yourself or Mylan or no one at all, "Thank you," and then you walk forward. Not away from the story, but forward with it. It's a contract you never signed, but it holds all the same. And now, as you let your eyes close, let everything soften around the edges. The room you once sat in, with its lanterns, teacups, and gentle shadows, is still there, quietly resting in the corner of your mind. The streets of Chang'an are fading now, not disappearing, but dissolving gently into the hush of your breath. You no longer hear footsteps. You no longer need words. Just the soft rhythm of your heartbeat, steady and kind, reminding you that you are safe, that you are still, that nothing is rushing you anymore. The stories have been told. The paper is folded. The ink has dried. But the feeling remains. A gentle reminder that some truths don't need to be loud to last. They sit beside you in silence, warm as candlelight, soft as silk, and patient as time. So breathe. Let the world fall quiet. Let your thoughts slow. You are in a space now where no one asks anything of you. No performance. No obligation. Only rest. Let each breath become longer. Let the tension slide from your shoulders. Let your fingers relax. Your eyes soften. Your jaw unclenches. You are weightless now, and the past, so full of noise and complexity, has become your lullaby. A whisper through the trees. Poem written in the air. A contract not of ink, but of peace. Sleep well, dream gently, and remember, even forgotten stories remember you.